Now that we've talked about calculating the price index, let's dive a little bit more into it. If you remember, the price index is simply going to compare the prices of a good or goods in one year, in some year, to the price of the same or similar goods from another year. So the way that we calculate it, as we showed in the last video, is taking the price of a good in one year, dividing it by the price of the good in a base year. Now, if you remember, that base year was chosen arbitrarily. So some of the more common price indices are the Consumer Price Index. You hear about that quite often. It's a very common price index. There's also the Wholesale Price Index. And when it comes to agriculture, we have the index of prices both received or paid by farmers. So whenever we start talking about this index, we're looking at how much money the prices, or what are the prices of the goods that the farmers are receiving, and then what are they paying for their inputs. So these are three common price indices that we see, especially in agriculture. Now, why are price indices so important? Well, they help us measure inflation. And if you've never really heard of inflation before, inflation is a rise in the general price level. It's when things basically become more expensive. So think about this way. You're looking at buying a brand new car and you see a car that's sitting on the lot, and that car costs $20,000 this year. Costs $20,000. You could walk off that with that car for $20,000. But you go back and it's a year later and you look at that same car, and that car now costs $20,400. Well, what happened to cause that price of that car to increase? Did the car change? No. Did anything else really change? No, not really. But if we look at basically everything in the economy, all the prices are increasing on a basket of goods. So that dealership must raise their price to compensate for the added cost of all of the other goods that are going into it. So what inflation basically is that the prices of goods are just increasing. Maybe the demand for goods as a whole is increasing and it's causing prices to go up. It's the same products, but the prices are increasing. This is known as inflation. And in this example, this was a 2% inflation. This means that the price of that car rose by 2% from one year to the next. Now, this is a very simplified example of what inflation is, but we can see inflation all around us on a day-to-day basis or a year-to-year basis. Things just cost a little bit more the next year, and that's known as inflation. Or we could have the exact opposite happen. We could have what's known as deflation. And deflation is whenever the general price level is actually falling. Normally we see inflation, not deflation, but occasionally we can see deflation where the prices of goods as a whole throughout the economy actually begin to fall. So whenever we deal with inflation, we usually deal with it on a percentage measure. We're saying, well, how are prices changing in terms of percentage? Did prices increase by 2%? Did they fall by 2%? Did they increase by 1%? Well, inflation is measured by these price indices. And one of the common ones that we are using to measure inflation is the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index is showing how prices are changing for a basket of goods. And what it does is it shows a percentage change in price. Well, this percentage change in price is shown whenever we say, well, it was a 2% increase in inflation, or a 3% increase in inflation, or a 5% decrease in the prices, so 5% basically deflation. So the price indices are showing a percentage change, which is how we calculate inflation. So inflation is measured by these price indices. Now, I talked about inflation and how it's commonly measured using the Consumer Price Index. Let's dive into what the Consumer Price Index is real quick. The Consumer Price Index is a measure of the average change over time in prices paid by the urban consumer for a market basket of consumer goods and services. Well, if we dive into what that means, what the CPI is, the Consumer Price Index, is the Bureau of Labor Statistics have taken say 500 commonly purchased goods that might be purchased by urban consumers. These might include the price of beef. It might include the price of chicken. It might include the price of cell phones. What are common goods that urban consumers are buying right now? And it's going to monitor how the prices of those, say, 500 goods, that basket of goods, those 500 goods are lumped together and put into what we call basket of goods. And we're looking at how are the prices as a whole changing for all 500 goods. We understand that the price of gas might decrease, but maybe the price of beef is increased. So they kind of cancel each other out. So we're looking at that whole basket as a whole and how much are the prices changing for that. And that's how we come up with the Consumer Price Index. And it's a measuring the average change over time in the prices that are being paid. So it's looking at these prices, and are these prices rising? Or are they falling? And that's basically how we get inflation. So why is inflation so important? What does inflation really affect? Well, first and foremost, inflation affects prices. If the prices of goods are going up, well, yeah, it's going to affect the prices that you might charge for your goods. It might also affect, or will affect, interest rates. So if you're looking to go and buy this car for $20,000, but now the next year, and you go to actually buy that car, and the car is actually $20,400, and you're looking to take a loan on that vehicle, you might be hoping for a lower interest rate to offset the added cost in the next year. Or whenever things get more expensive, people tend to buy less. So those that are loaning out money might actually lower their interest rates to get you to buy more. So inflation does affect interest rates. It affects expenditures or just purchases. Whenever a consumer goes out to buy something and the price is 3 times what it was a year ago, you may not be buying as much. So yeah, it's going to affect what you buy and how much you buy. And it also affects your disposable income. So let's say, for example, you're used to buying, say, 5 pounds of beef at $4 a pound. But now all of a sudden, that same 5 pounds of beef costs $5 a pound, and now instead of spending $20, you're spending $25. So you have less income left over to spend on other things. So it will affect your disposable income. So inflation is a very important aspect, and that inflation is measured by price indices, or the most common one that's measured by is the price index, or the Consumer Price Index. And it basically shows the percentage change in prices for a basket of goods, and the prices, how the prices change over time, and what those basket of goods are being bought by typically your urban consumers.